Hi, and welcome back to English Without Limit. I'm Julia, and as always, I'm so happy to have you here with me today. Whether this is your very first time listening, or you've been part of this journey for a while, you are in the right place. This is where we focus on real, practical English. Not perfect English, real communication that works in daily life. Because fluency isn't about knowing every single word. It's not about memorizing grammar rules or complicated vocabulary. Fluency is about feeling comfortable expressing yourself, understanding others, and being understood. And one of the most powerful ways to move toward that fluency is by learning phrases in context. Let me ask you something. Have you ever studied an English phrase, repeated it several times, maybe even wrote it down and practiced it? But then, when the real-life moment came, your mind just froze? The phrase was in your head, but suddenly it didn't feel natural to say it. Maybe the situation felt different from what you imagined, or the words didn't seem to match the tone or the moment. If this has happened to you, you are not alone. It's actually very common. And the reason it happens is simple. We often learn phrases without context. We see them in a book or on a list. But language doesn't live on a list. It lives in situations, in conversations, in emotions, reactions, and intentions. That's why, in this episode, we're focusing on a different way to learn and remember useful phrases. I want to help you see how learning in real-life situations changes everything. Because when you learn a phrase inside a story, inside a scene that you can imagine, you don't just memorize the words. You connect them to meaning, to feeling, to people. And that's when language becomes something you can use with confidence. Today, we'll explore stories from people in different countries who are on their English journey just like you. You'll hear how learning in context helped them go from awkward silence to natural, confident responses. These stories are based on real challenges that learners face. You'll hear about moments at cafes, in meetings, in small talk situations, and in everyday conversations. And I'll break each one down to show you how context shaped the language they used, and how you can use those same phrases in your own life. Before we dive in, I want to set the tone. This podcast is not about being perfect. It's not about trying to sound like a native speaker. It's about connecting, finding your own voice in English, building your confidence, one small phrase at a time. If you ever felt nervous about speaking, or worried that your English sounds too formal, too simple, or even robotic, then this episode is especially for you. Because today, we're taking that pressure off and focusing on something much more helpful. Learning phrases that fit naturally into real conversations. Here's a little truth that helped me when I was learning another language. People don't speak like textbooks. They speak in moments. They speak based on how they feel, what they need, and what's happening around them. So, if you want to understand English more deeply and use it more comfortably, you need to meet the language where it really lives. And that means paying attention to how people talk in context. Think about it. You can learn the phrase, "Can I help?" and still feel lost when it's time to order food at a busy cafe. Why? Because maybe the menu is confusing. Maybe the staff is in a rush. Maybe you're nervous about pronunciation. But if you've heard someone say, "Can I have the same as her?" while pointing to the next customer, or, "Actually, I'll go with the special," in a scene you can picture in your mind, then suddenly, you have something to hold on to. You have a reference point, an image, a memory. That's context. And that's the difference between memorizing and speaking naturally. As we move through this episode, I'm going to invite you to do something simple but powerful. Picture yourself in each situation. Imagine you are the person in the story. Feel the emotion. Feel the challenge. See the moment. Then listen to the phrase that helped that person express themselves. Let it sink in. Because when you imagine yourself in the scene, the phrase becomes yours. It's no longer just a sentence you learned. It becomes a tool you can use. So, let's make this time together really valuable. If you can, find a quiet space or put on your headphones as you walk or commute. And as you listen, let your mind relax. There's no test at the end. No need to take notes right now. Just absorb, enjoy, and imagine. That's how we train your brain to recognize patterns, to notice how language works, and to make speaking feel more natural. Before we dive in, I have one small favor to ask. If you've been enjoying this podcaster, if today's episode helps you understand something new, consider subscribing or leaving a review. When you do that, it tells the platform that this kind of content matters. And it helps more learners like you find this podcast and join our community. And truly, that's what we area community. Learners from all over the world, listening, sharing, growing together. I know that sometimes English can feel overwhelming. So many words. So many expressions, so many different accents and styles. But today, I want you to know this. You don't need to learn everything. You only need to learn what helps you communicate in the situations that matter to you. That's it. And I'll guide you through that. So take a deep breath. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be present. Listen. Imagine. Let the phrases come to life in your mind. You're not studying anymore. You're experiencing the language. And that's when the real magic happens. Let's get started. Today, I want to tell you about Marta. She's from Lisbon, Portugal, and she recently moved to Manchester to study design. Marta had been learning English for years in school. She was great at writing essays. She could pass grammar tests easily. But when it came to speaking in real-life situations, she didn't feel ready at all. She told me it felt like there was a wall between the English in her head and the English people actually spoke around her. And one moment, during her first week in Manchester, made that wall feel even bigger. Marta was out exploring the city, excited to discover new places. She stopped at a busy cafe near her campus. She had memorized the phrase, "Can I have?" from her textbook. She was sure that was what she needed to order food. So, when she reached the front of the line, she smiled at the person behind the counter, took a deep breath, and said, "Can you have?" And then, she froze. Her eyes moved quickly over the menu behind the cashier, but the words looked longer than she expected. Some of the sandwich names were unfamiliar. Some had ingredients she didn't recognize. She felt the line behind her growing longer. She panicked. and all the other English phrases disappeared from her mind. She had practiced, "Can I have?" but she had no idea how to finish the sentence naturally. In that moment, it was like she only had half the bridge and couldn't get to the other side. The cashier waited politely. Marta pointed at a random item and mumbled, "That one." It wasn't what she really wanted, but she just wanted to move on. Later, she told me she felt disappointed. Not because she got the wrong sandwich, but because she had been so close to using English confidently and still didn't know what to say. That's when we started talking about something important. Learning phrases in isolation is very different from learning them in context. You see, Marta knew the grammar. She knew the structure. "Can I have" is technically correct, but she hadn't heard it used in real conversations. So she didn't know what usually comes next. She had memorized a shell of a sentence, not a living, breathing phrase. So I asked her, "What would have helped you in that moment?" She said, "If I had heard someone order before me, if I had seen it happen in real life." And that's exactly it. Context gives meaning. It gives rhythm. It gives confidence. Because when you hear or imagine a full interaction, the phrase becomes part of a scene, and your brain holds on to that much better. So let's break that moment down and look at what Marta could have said with a bit of help from context. Imagine you're at that same cafe. There are people ahead of you ordering. There's a small blackboard with the specials of the day, and the staff are friendly, but fast. What are some phrases that fit naturally into that situation? You might hear someone say, "Hi there, can I have the chicken sandwich, please?" Simple, direct. Or maybe, "Actually, I'll go with the tuna melt." That phrase, "I'll go with," is so useful. It's casual, natural, and perfect for making a choice. You could also hear, "Can I get the same as her?" That one is great when you feel unsure about the menu. Or, "Could I try the daily special?" "I'll have the house salad, please." These are not complex phrases. But when you hear them inside a full scene, when you picture them happening, they become part of your mental library. Now, here's something interesting. After that first experience, Marta started paying attention to how people ordered in cafes and restaurants. She would listen carefully while standing in line. She noticed the words people used, the tone of voice, even the pauses. She told me, "It's funny. Once I heard someone say, 'Actually, can I change that to oat milk?' And I realized that 'actually' is a really common way to soften your sentence." That discovery came from observation, not from a textbook. So she started practicing those phrases, not as single expressions, but inside imagined scenes. She would close her eyes and picture herself walking into a cafe, looking at the board, greeting the cashier, placing her order, responding to follow-up questions like, "Eat in or take away?" and even paying. Each part of the scene became a mini dialogue she could rehearse in her mind. And little by little, that wall she felt at the beginning started to fall away. What helped Marta wasn't learning 10 more phrases from a vocabulary list. What helped was learning one phrase in a real setting, hearing it, seeing it, imagining herself using it. That's the power of context. When you hear a phrase like, "Can he have?" In a sentence like, "Can I have the same as her?" you're not just learning words. You're learning timing, emotion, and purpose. That's why we remember movie lines and not grammar examples. Our brains are designed to remember stories, emotions, and experiences. So if you want to speak English naturally, don't just learn what people say. Learn why they say it, when they say it, and how it feels in that moment. This is something I want you to try. The next time you hear someone speaking English, maybe in a YouTube video, a series, or even on the street, try to notice the situation. What's happening? What's the goal of the person speaking? Are they asking, suggesting, complaining, inviting? Then notice how their words match that goal. This small habit can transform the way you learn phrases. Instead of memorizing, you'll be absorbing. Instead of repeating lines, you'll be learning to respond. And don't forget, you can practice this with your imagination too. You don't need to be in Manchester or London. You can be in your kitchen, pretending to order a sandwich or coffee. Close your eyes, create a small scene in your mind, and speak out loud. It might feel silly at first, but your brain doesn't care if the situation is real or imagined. It will still learn through context. That's what Marta did. 2 weeks later, she went back to the same cafe. This time, she had practiced 2 or 3 different ways to order. When she reached the front of the line, she smiled and said, "Hi there. I'll go with the tuna melt today, please." The cashier nodded and smiled back. It was a small moment, but for Marta, it was a big win. She had used English confidently, and more importantly, she had owned that phrase, because it lived in her memory as part of a story. When you learn a phrase in isolation, you might remember the words, but when you learn it in context, you remember the feeling, the situation, the interaction, and that's what makes the language yours. Let me explain what I mean. There's a big difference between memorizing a phrase and owning it. When you memorize something, it sits in your mind like a script. It's a line you've practiced. Maybe you even rehearsed it in front of a mirror. But when the real moment arrives, when the person in front of you is waiting for a response, when the environment is noisy or unfamiliar, when you feel nervous, that memorized line might feel disconnected. You'll hesitate, not because you forgot the words, but because you're unsure if they fit the moment. Owning a phrase, on the other hand, feels different. It's not just about knowing the words. It's about feeling the phrase, knowing when it fits naturally, saying it without thinking too hard. That kind of confidence doesn't come from repetition alone. It comes from experience, from exposure, from context. When you hear a phrase in a real setting, let's say in a cafe, in a shop, or during a meeting, your brain doesn't just store the words, it stores the scene. It remembers the tone, the purpose, the reaction, even the emotions tied to that moment. That's why watching shows, listening to conversations, and paying attention to real interactions is so powerful. Your brain starts to build a map of how language works. Not just the mechanics, but the rhythm, the feeling, the flow. You start to develop what I call situational awareness in language. You begin to notice patterns. You notice that people don't say, "I desire to have coffee." They say, "I'll grab a coffee." Or, "Can I get a latte?" And suddenly, phrases that once felt stiff become a fluid because you've heard them used naturally. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine you learned the phrase, "I'm fine, thank you, and you?" It's one of the first things English learners are taught. But how often do you hear people in real life actually say that full sentence? Not very often. In casual situations, people are more likely to say, "I'm good, thanks," or just, "Good, you?" And if you've only practiced the formal version, you might feel awkward when others respond differently. Or you might sound overly formal in a relaxed setting. That gap between what you learned and what's actually used can be confusing, but it also shows how valuable context is. When you listen closely to how people speak in different situations, you'll start to realize communication isn't only about words. It's about timing. It's about purpose. It's about tone. For example, someone might say, "Not really," as a soft way to disagree, or "Could be better," when talking about their day. These short phrases carry meaning that goes far beyond the dictionary, and the only way to truly understand and use them naturally is to hear them in action. In scenes where people are being themselves, not reading a script. I remember talking to a learner from Barcelona named Andres. He had a great vocabulary. He could express himself clearly, but he told me he always felt like he was acting when he spoke English. He said, "It's like I'm performing a character that's not me." When I asked him why, he said, "Because the phrases I use don't feel like mine. They feel like lines from a book." So, we worked together on noticing language in real settings. He started listening to short interviews, sitcoms, even customer service calls. And every time he heard a phrase that felt real, that felt like something he might say in his own language, he wrote it down. Not just the words, but also what was happening in the scene. Within a few weeks, his English began to shift. He no longer said, "I do not agree with you," which he had memorized from a textbook. He started saying, "Yeah, I'm not so sure about that." Or, "Maybe, but I see it a bit differently." These were phrases he had picked up from watching people actually disagree in polite conversation, and they became his. Not because he forced them, but because he recognized them as useful, real, and true to the situation. So, here's something you can start doing today. The next time you watch something in English, maybe a series on Netflix, a video on YouTube, or even this podcast, try to focus not just on the words, but on the situation. Ask yourself, why did the person say that? What were they trying to do? Were they asking for help? Making a suggestion? Inviting someone in? Ending a conversation? Understanding the why helps you choose the right how. And pay attention to when things are said. Timing matters in communication. Think about the difference between saying, "That's interesting," at the start of a meeting versus saying it after someone shares a difficult story. Same words, very different effect. The more you notice these moments, the more you'll develop a natural feel for when to use certain phrases and when to choose something else. Another important detail is tone. A phrase like, "Are you serious?" can mean very different things depending on how it's said. It can express surprise, doubt, or even frustration. When you memorize a phrase without hearing it in a real voice, you miss all that hidden meaning. That's why listening to real conversations and repeating the phrases with the same tone and rhythm is so helpful. It teaches your mouth and your mind to work together. You can also practice this on your own by shadowing. Shadowing means repeating what you hear as closely as possible. In real time, find a short video clip. Listen to a few lines and try to say them out loud exactly as the speaker does. Focus on the intonation, the pauses, the stress. This kind of practice takes you beyond memorization and moves you into fluency. It builds muscle memory that allows you to speak without overthinking. And here's something else I recommend. Keep a context notebook, not just a vocabulary notebook. Write down the phrase, the situation, and the feeling. For example, phrase, "I'll go with the salad." Situation, ordering food at a cafe. Feeling, making a quick decision without pressure. Doing this turns language into experience. It helps your brain store the phrase in a way that's useful, not just correct. You're not just studying English anymore. You're living it. When you move from scripts to spontaneity, you stop thinking in categories like present perfect or past continuous, and you start thinking in moments. You don't worry about grammar rules while ordering a sandwich. You focus on the interaction. You don't calculate tenses during small talk. You respond based on how you feel and what makes sense in the flow. That's what natural speakers do. And that's what you're learning to do too. You're building something that goes deeper than memorization. You're building instinct. You're training your ear, your voice, and your awareness all at once. And the more you do it, the more confident you become. Not because you know every word, but because you know how to listen, how to respond, and how to stay present in the conversation. Let me introduce you to Matteo. He's from Milan, Italy. He works as a software engineer for an international company based in Berlin. Matteo is smart, focused. He loves solving problems, and he speaks English well. Technically, he studied it at school. He practiced reading and writing online. He even watched tutorials in English to improve his vocabulary for work. But like many professionals who use English as a second language, Matteo found that the real challenge wasn't reading documents or writing emails. It was live conversations, especially meetings. Those made him feel unsure. His team includes people from Germany, the Netherlands, Poland, and the UK. Meetings are held in English. They move fast. Different accents, different speaking speeds, background noise, technical interruptions. All of that made it hard for him to follow every word. Matteo told me about one meeting early in his job, a video call with several managers and developers. They were discussing a project timeline. One colleague who had a strong accent and spoke very quickly said something important about a deadline. Matteo didn't catch it. He needed clarification. So he said, very clearly, "Repeat, please." Now, in theory, there's nothing wrong with that. Grammatically, it's correct. Short, clear. But the moment he said it, he noticed something. A small shift in the room. Or rather, the virtual room. There was a slight pause. The colleague blinked, looked a little surprised, then repeated the sentence. A little more slowly this time. No one said anything about it. But Matteo felt uncomfortable. He sensed that his request, even though it was correct, didn't come across the way he intended. It felt too direct, almost like a command, not a polite request. After the meeting, he started thinking, why did a simple phrase make the atmosphere feel tense? Why did it feel awkward even though his English was correct? Matteo began paying attention. He listened to how others in his company asked for clarification, and that's when he noticed something important. People rarely said just repeat. Instead, they used softer, more natural alternatives. Phrases that made the conversation feel smoother, more cooperative, less abrupt. Matteo began hearing things like, "Sorry, I didn't catch that. Could you say it again? Would you mind repeating that part about the deadline?" Or even, "I missed the last bit. Could you go over it one more time?" These weren't just longer sentences. They had tone. They had rhythm. They matched the flow of conversation. And most importantly, they didn't sound like a command. They sounded collaborative. That was a turning point for Matteo. He realized that in professional settings, how you say something can matter just as much as what you say. When you ask for clarification, you're not just requesting information. You're also sending a message about how you relate to the other person. A soft, polite phrase shows respect. It keeps the atmosphere positive, especially in multicultural environments where tone and intention carry a lot of weight. So Matteo began practicing. At first, he wrote down a few sentences. "Sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't quite get that. Can you say it one more time? Would you mind going over that again?" Then he took it further. He imagined different workplace situations, client calls, technical meetings, daily stand-ups, and he practiced those phrases in context, not like a robot, but inside imagined conversations. He pictured the other person's voice, the timing, the flow, and little by little, those phrases became his. I remember when he told me, "I don't feel nervous anymore about asking someone to repeat something. I know how to do it in a way that keeps the flow going." That kind of progress doesn't show up in a grammar test, but it changes everything in real life. Now, let's pause and talk about why this matters. In English, especially in professional settings, we often use softeners, words or phrases that make requests feel more polite, more respectful, less like an order. Phrases like, "Would you mind? Could you? I'm sorry, but..." They're not required, but they help maintain positive relationships. They make conversations cooperative. Compare these two sentences. Repeat. And, "Sorry, could you repeat that part about the new feature?" The first one? Fast and efficient. But in many workplaces, especially international teams, it can come across as cold or even rude. The second one? Long, but polite and natural. And this doesn't just apply to asking for repetition. It applies to so many situations. Asking for help, making suggestions, offering feedback. Tone matters. What Matteo learned is what I want you to remember. You don't need perfect English to sound professional. You don't need long, complicated sentences. You just need a few natural, flexible phrases. And you need to hear them in context, so you know how they feel, not just how they sound. That's the beauty of learning through stories. When you imagine Matteo in that meeting, feeling unsure, then building confidence, you relate to him. Maybe you've been in a similar situation. That connection helps your brain remember the language better. Because you're not just learning a phrase. You're learning how to use it, why it matters, and how it feels in the moment. Here are a few useful phrases you can start using right away when you don't catch what someone said. Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Can you say it again? I missed the last part. What did you say after lunch? Would you mind repeating that more slowly? Can you go over that one more time? I'm not sure I understood. Could you clarify what you meant by that? You don't need to use them all. Just choose one or two that feel natural to you. And practice them. But here's the key. Put them inside a real scene in your mind. Picture yourself in a meeting or on a video call. Hear someone speaking quickly, and then imagine yourself using the phrase. The more you practice in context, the more these phrases will become automatic. Matteo now uses English every day at work. He still encounters fast talkers. He still has moments of confusion, but he no longer freezes. He knows how to stay present in the conversation, how to ask for clarity without feeling embarrassed, and how to keep things flowing. That's not just about language. That's about communication, and it's something you can build. One phrase, one situation, one story at a time. Let's shift the focus now to something very practical, something you can start using right after this episode. I want to talk about how you build memory when learning English phrases. A lot of learners make the same mistake at the start. They try to memorize long lists of expressions without any context. They write down 10 or 15 phrases, repeat them over and over, maybe even test themselves, and then feel frustrated when they can't remember those phrases later, or when they freeze in real conversations. If that has happened to you, don't worry. It's not about your memory. It's about how your brain works with language. Our brains aren't designed to hold on to random words and expressions like data on a spreadsheet. They're designed to understand experiences. That means we remember better when we connect language to a scene, a purpose, a feeling. And that's exactly why learning with mini scenes is more powerful than memorizing word lists. Let me explain what I mean by a mini scene. A mini scene is a short, specific moment in daily life where you need to communicate something. It could be calling to make a doctor's appointment. It could be asking for directions to the train station. It could be ordering coffee, paying a bill, checking into a hotel, or asking a colleague for help. These are the kinds of moments where real language lives. The more you focus your learning on these moments, the more naturally your English will grow. Instead of sitting down and saying, "Today, I'm going to learn 10 new phrases," try this. Pick one real-life situation, just one. Then ask yourself, What's actually said in this situation? What words are used? What tone? What questions are common? What answers are expected? For example, imagine you're calling to make a dentist appointment. That's your mini scene. You don't need to memorize 20 phrases. You just need 2 or 3 that are likely to come up. You might say, "Hi, I'd like to make an appointment, please. Do you have anything available next week? What times do you have on Friday?" Now, instead of learning those sentences by heart, picture yourself in the call. Imagine you're holding the phone. You hear the receptionist answer. You say the words. You hear the reply. You respond. Maybe they ask for your name, and you say, "It's Julia Green." Maybe they say, "Morning or afternoon?" And you answer, "Afternoon would be better." That scene might only last 2 minutes in your mind, but your brain will remember it far better than if you'd just written down the sentence, "I'd like to make an appointment." When you learn phrases inside a mini scene, your memory links the language to action, to emotion, and to rhythm. It doesn't just store vocabulary. It stores experience. And when you're in a similar situation later, your brain will go, "I've seen this before. I know what to say." Here's another example. Let's say you're traveling in a new city and you need to ask for directions. That's another great mini scene. You could imagine yourself on a street corner, looking a little lost, and someone walks by. You stop them and say, "Excuse me, do you know how to get to the central station? Is it far from here? Should I turn left at the next intersection?" You don't need to memorize all possible directions or traffic vocabulary. You just need to imagine the flow of a short, polite exchange. And the more clearly you see it in your mind, the more easily your English will follow in real life. Here's why this works. When you attach a phrase to a specific moment, you reduce mental confusion. Your brain doesn't have to search a long list of phrases to find the right one. Instead, it goes straight to the mini scene where that phrase lives. And once you've practiced that scene a few times, it becomes automatic. Another reason mini scenes help is because they reflect real pressure. When we speak English in real life, we often feel nervous. Our hearts beat faster. Our minds speed up. If we've only learned language through abstract study, that pressure can block us. But if we've practiced that language inside a mini scene, where we've already imagined what it feels like to be there, our brains are more prepared. We've already lived the moment once, even if it was just in our imagination. This is a trick that actors use too. Before they go on stage, they rehearse scenes in detail, not just the words, but the movement, the emotion, the timing. Language learners can use the same method. Visualize the moment and practice your role in it. You prepare yourself to perform confidently. Now, I want you to try this with me. Choose one situation you might face this week. Maybe it's sending a message to a colleague, ordering food, making small talk with a neighbor, or asking a question at a store. Think about that situation. Then write down just 2 or 3 natural phrases that fit there. Don't worry about being perfect. Focus on being realistic. What do people actually say in that situation? Let's say your situation is picking up a coffee on the way to work. Your mini scene might include, "Hi, can I get a medium latte, please? Actually, make that a cappuccino." For here or to go? To go, please. That's all you need. A few simple phrases imagined in a real moment. Now, say them out loud. Picture the cafe, the sound of the machines, the voice of the barista. Picture yourself responding naturally. If you do that 2 or 3 times, you've just trained your brain far more effectively than reading a vocabulary list for 20 minutes. And it doesn't stop there. You can build a small collection of mini scenes. One for a phone call, one for a restaurant, one for a job interview, one for checking into a hotel. Each scene becomes a tool. You don't need hundreds of phrases. You just need a small group of useful ones that match the situations in your life. You can even record yourself practicing these mini scenes. It doesn't need to be perfect, just your voice talking through the moment. Listen to it later. Notice your tone, your rhythm, your confidence. The more you do it, the more natural your speaking becomes. You're not memorizing anymore. You're simulating real communication. And that's where fluency grows. If you want to take it a step further, listen to real examples. Find short audio clips or video scenes with the same situations you've practiced. Watch how people actually speak. Notice the pace, the pauses, the expressions. You'll begin to recognize familiar phrases in action, and they'll stick in your memory even more. I've seen learners go from shy and silent to confident and clear, just by shifting from word lists to mini scenes. They stopped studying English as a subject and started living it as a set of experiences. Every time they practiced a scene, they added another tool to their fluency toolkit. So remember this: don't aim to learn everything. Aim to learn what matters. And what matters most is the language you need for the moments that are real in your life. If you focus on those one scene at a time, you'll find that English stops feeling like something you study and starts feeling like something you use. Let me give you a few more examples that Clara now uses, and you can start using too. Not bad, you? A natural way to respond when someone asks, "How's it going?" You always work out at this time? Perfect for the gym, yoga class, or a regular coffee shop. Crazy weather today, huh? Weather works if it's connected to the moment, like heavy rain or sudden sunshine. That class was intense, wasn't it? Great for after a workout or a shared activity. These kinds of lines aren't just vocabulary. They're social tools. They make you visible. They tell people, "I'm friendly, I'm open to talking." And when you use them naturally, they often lead to real conversation. Just like Clara discovered, she told me. Once I realized that small talk isn't a test, I relaxed. I stopped trying to sound clever, and I started sounding human. That change in mindset is huge. Many learners think small talk is about showing good English, but really, it's about showing yourself, your curiosity, your kindness, your attention to the moment. Now, every time Clara goes to the gym, she has a few go-to phrases ready, but she doesn't force them. She looks around, listens, notices the mood. If someone looks tired, she might say, "Tough day." If someone's using a machine she likes, she might smile and say, "That's the best one, isn't it?" These small interactions don't always become full conversations, but they build something important connection. And that's what English is really for. Not just to pass tests or send emails, but to connect. To be part of the world around you, even in small ways. So, if you've ever felt like Clara stuck at "Hi, how are you?" remember this. Small talk is built with context. Look around. Match your words to the moment. Say something short, something easy, something real. That's how conversations begin. And the more you practice, the more natural it will feel. Let's get honest for a moment. I want to talk about something many learners forget when they try to sound fluent in English. And that is this. Not every phrase is for you. You don't need to speak like someone in a movie or a podcast. You don't need to copy the exact phrases your teacher or textbook gives you. Why? Because fluency doesn't come from repeating random expressions. It comes from using language that fits your life, your day, your habits, your world. So, let me ask you something. Have you ever learned a phrase that sounded great in a lesson, but when you tried to use it, it felt strange? Maybe you memorized something like, "Do you come here often?" because it was in a small talk exercise, but you realized you don't go to the same places often enough to use it. Or maybe your course taught you how to talk about traffic, but you walk to work and never really need to say those things. That disconnect is important. If a phrase doesn't match your experience, it will always feel a little artificial when you try to use it. That's why today I want to encourage you to personalize your English. Make it yours. Focus on learning and practicing phrases that match your real life, not someone else's version of life, not a character in a sitcom, and not the example in a textbook. Your life. Let's take a simple example. Earlier in the episode, we talked about Clara at the gym. The phrase "busy day" worked perfectly for her because she was in that environment and the people around her shared that same routine. But if you don't go to the gym, that phrase might never be useful for you. And that's okay. There's no universal list of essential phrases that everyone must learn. What's essential is what you'll actually use. Maybe your daily life includes walking your dog in the morning. You see other people walking dogs, neighbors gardening, delivery people passing by. That's a real moment with real opportunities for English. In that case, useful phrases might be, "Morning. Nice dog. What breed is he? Is he friendly? Great weather for a walk. Right now?" Those might seem simple, but if you walk your dog every day and have a few phrases ready for that routine, you'll start to feel more natural and confident. You'll use English in a way that fits your rhythm, and it will stop feeling like something separate from your life. Or maybe you work in a shop or a cafe. You see customers, co-workers, delivery drivers, and tourists. You have dozens of chances to speak English in short, friendly ways. So, your personal phrase list might include things like, "Can I help you find something?" "Card or cash?" "Have a good one." "Next in line, please." Each of these fits the environment you're already in. You're not forcing English into your day. You're making it part of what you already do. Now, if you're a student who spends a lot of time in libraries or classrooms, your English needs are different. You might want to feel confident asking classmates for help, speaking with teachers, or even chatting during study breaks. So your phrases might be, Do you know where I can find this book? Mind if I sit here? What did you think of the lecture? Again, very different from someone working in retail, or someone working in construction, or someone who's a stay-at-home parent. That's the point. We're all live in different worlds, and your English should reflect your world. Let me tell you about a listener I spoke with a few months ago. His name is Luis, and he's originally from Madrid. He works as a delivery driver in Amsterdam. His job involves visiting many offices and residential buildings every day. Luis told me that in the beginning, he tried to learn the English he found in language apps and courses. But most of it didn't help him. He knew how to talk about sports and movies, but not how to ask someone to sign for a package. So, we sat down and made a list together. We thought about the real moments in his day when English was useful, like when he rang a doorbell and someone answered, when he needed to leave a package with the receptionist, when someone asked, "Where's this from?" Or, "Can you leave it with the neighbor?" We came up with phrases like, "I've got a delivery for this address. Could you sign here, please?" No one answered. "Should I leave it next door?" "I can come back later if that works better for you." Luis said learning those phrases changed everything for him. Not only because they helped with his job, but because they made him feel competent in English. He wasn't just practicing for the future. He was using English now, every day, in situations that mattered to him. That gave him confidence. It made him feel like English was a tool he could depend on. That's what I want for you too. So, here's something you can do right now or right after this episode. Make a short list, a personal list. I want you to write down 5 or 6 real-life situations that are part of your weekly routine. Keep it simple. Think about your day from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed. Where do you go? Who do you see? What do you usually say in your first language? And what would be useful to say in English? Here are some ideas to get you started. You get coffee every morning from the same cafe. You take public transport and ask for information. You go to the same supermarket every week. You work with international colleagues. You chat with neighbors or parents at school. You study in a quiet space and sometimes need help. You volunteer somewhere or help tourists in your city. Once you have your list, think about 1 or 2 phrases for each situation. Just 1 or 2, not 10. Choose ones that are natural and commonly used. You don't need long sentences. You need short, real ones. Phrases that people actually say. Phrases that make sense for you. And here's a tip. Don't just write the phrases. Say them out loud. Imagine yourself in the situation and say the phrase the way you would in real life. Add a little smile or raise your voice slightly if the moment calls for it. Treat it like a mini rehearsal for your own life. That's how you take control of your learning. That's how English becomes part of who you are, not just something you study. When you practice phrases that match your life, you stop feeling like an actor reading lines, and you start feeling like yourself, just speaking in another language. It's easy to get distracted by long vocabulary lists or complicated grammar rules. But in the end, the English that stays with you is the English that fits into your real world. So, choose that world. Build your own phrase book based on your days, your habits, your places. When you do that, something amazing happens. The words you learn start to live. They move with you. They support you. They make you feel ready for the moments that matter, because you've already prepared for them, one phrase at a time. Let me tell you about Daniel. He's a photographer from Munich, and a few years ago he moved to London. He found a quiet neighborhood not far from the city center, full of narrow streets, brick buildings, and green parks. It was the kind of place where people greet each other in passing, share garden tips, and occasionally chat while taking the trash out or checking the mail. Daniel liked that atmosphere. It reminded him of home in some ways, but it also made him feel like an outsider in others. He was determined to improve his English through real-life practice, not just books or videos. So, every morning when he left his flat, he made a point to say good morning to anyone he passed. He would smile, nod politely, and continue on his way. It was a habit he felt proud of. It made him feel like part of the community, even in a small way. But over time, Daniel started to feel limited. Saying good morning was nice, but it didn't lead to anything more. People responded with a smile or a morning, but then silence followed. The conversations he wanted weren't happening. He didn't know how to take the next step without sounding awkward. What came after good morning? That was the question stuck in his head. Then, one spring morning, something happened that gave him the answer. Daniel was locking his bike outside his building when his neighbor walked by. She smiled and said, "Lovely weather, isn't it?" He froze. It wasn't that he didn't understand the words. He knew what lovely weather meant. He even understood the grammar. But in that moment, something about the phrase caught him off guard. It felt unfamiliar not in vocabulary, but in tone. It wasn't a question about weather. Not really. It was a kind of invitation, a gentle opening. And Daniel realized he didn't know how to respond. So he just nodded and smiled. "Yes," he said quietly. But by the time he opened his mouth to say more, she had already passed. It was such a small moment, but Daniel thought about it all day. He realized that what she had said wasn't random. It was something he'd heard in movies, in shows, maybe even in podcasts. Lovely weather, isn't it? Wasn't a meteorological report. It was a typical friendly way to start a casual conversation. And because he hadn't practiced responding to that kind of line, he missed the opportunity to connect. That day became a turning point for him. Daniel started paying closer attention to the little phrases people used in his neighborhood. Those simple, friendly expressions that didn't require deep topics or perfect grammar. He noticed that, "Lovely weather, isn't it?" was just one of many soft openings. People also said things like, "Can't complain, fingers crossed it stays like this." About time we had some sun. You never know in London. It could rain in 5 minutes. These weren't phrases he'd seen in language textbooks. They weren't taught in grammar lessons. But they were real. They were part of the rhythm of life in his community. And more than that, they were tools, ways to show friendliness, openness, and interest, without needing to dive into a full conversation right away. So, Daniel began to practice not just by repeating the phrases to himself, but by putting them into little scenes in his mind. He imagined unlocking his bike, seeing his neighbor, hearing the same phrase again. "Lovely weather, isn't it?" And this time he imagined himself smiling and saying, Yeah, finally some sun. Fingers crossed it stays like this. He practiced saying it out loud alone in his kitchen. He played with his tone, relaxed his voice, tried to make it feel easy. The more he practiced, the less stiff it felt. And soon, the next time a neighbor said something similar, he was ready. He responded naturally. Not perfectest naturally. That one sentence opened the door to a longer exchange. They talked for a few minutes about how unpredictable the weather had been, then about how quiet the street was lately, then about where he worked. It didn't feel like a performance. It felt like a moment of connection. And that's the power of these small, friendly phrases. They aren't just about weather or timing. They're about invitation. They're a way to say, I'm open to conversation. I see you. I'm part of this community. And when you have a few of those tools ready, you don't freeze when the moment comes. You step into it with confidence. Here are a few of Daniel's favorite phrases now, and I want to share them with you too. Can't complain. Great reply when someone says, "How are you?" Short, relaxed, and natural. Fingers crossed it stays like this. Perfect follow-up in a weather chat. You never know with this weather. Classic small talk line when the weather changes a lot. Morning. Looks like a good day. A nice opener as you pass someone. What a change from yesterday, right? Works well when the weather has shifted. These phrases are part of the unspoken culture of casual conversation. They don't put pressure on the other person to respond deeply. They simply create space. And sometimes, that's all you need. Daniel told me something that stuck with me. He said, I used to think I needed to know more grammar to have better conversations, but what I really needed was smaller words. The right small words at the right time. I love that because so often we think fluency is about knowing more. More vocabulary, more tenses, more complex structures. But in reality, fluency often grows out of the smallest pieces of language, words and phrases that are light, flexible, and tied to the situations we live every day. So, if you ever feel like Daniel, like you're stuck at good morning, and want to go further, start by collecting a few of these everyday phrases. Think about your neighborhood, your routine, your moments of contact. What do people usually say? What responses would feel natural for you? Then practice those. Not in isolation, but in context. Imagine the moment. Feel the timing. Speak them out loud. And little by little, they'll become yours. English isn't just for interviews or presentations. It's for the 5 seconds at the mailbox, the 2-minute chat by the elevator, the casual exchange before you go about your day. And when you have the right phrases ready, those small moments become big steps in your fluency. Before we end today's episode, I want to leave you with something personal, something gentle, simple, and powerful. A challenge, but not a hard one. This is a small step you can take starting today that will move you closer to the kind of English that feels real, natural, part of who you are. It doesn't require hours of study. It doesn't need a textbook. Just your voice, your imagination, and one phrase. Here's the invitation. I want you to choose one moment from your daily life. Nothing dramatic, nothing stressful. Just one small situation that happens regularly. Maybe you buy coffee in the cafe every morning. Maybe you walk your dog in the park. Maybe you chat with a colleague at work. Maybe you see the same neighbor each afternoon. Think of that moment. Picture it clearly. Now ask yourself, what is one phrase in English that fits that moment? Not a perfect phrase, not a fancy phrase. Just a real, simple phrase that you might want to say in that situation. One sentence you can practice this week. Let me give you an example. Imagine your moment is buying coffee at your local cafe. You see the same barista every morning. Maybe you usually just say hi and smile. But this week, your phrase might be, "How's your morning going?" It's friendly. It fits. It's something real people say. Now, here's what I want you to do with that phrase. First, repeat it aloud. Say it with your voice and odd in your head. Speak it like you're really saying it to someone. Feel the words in your mouth. Notice how it sounds. You don't need to rush. Just say it like you mean it. How's your morning going? Say it again, but this time, imagine the moment. Picture the cafe, the smell of coffee, the barista handing you your cup, the sound of other people talking around you. And in the middle of that, you say, "How's your morning going?" You see their smile. Maybe they answer, "Busy but good." And just like that, you've started a real conversation. That's the power of learning in context. When you attach a phrase to a moment, it becomes part of your experience. It's not just a line from a book. It's yours. You can try this with any moment. Maybe you're at work and you usually just say hi when you pass a coworker. Your phrase could be, "Crazy morning, huh?" Or maybe, "Did you catch the meeting?" Small, natural, real. Maybe you see the same cashier at the store. Your phrase could be, "Hope your day is going well." It's warm. It's easy. And over time, those small words turn into real exchanges. This is how fluency grows. Not in a rush, not in long study sessions, but in short, consistent moments of real contact, one phrase at a time. So, here's what I invite you to do this week. Choose one situation, just one. Don't make it complicated. Think about something that already happens in your routine. Then choose one English phrase that fits that moment. Say it aloud. Practice it with feeling. Imagine the scene. And then, when the real moment comes, try it out. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to say it fast. You just need to be present. Let the phrase come out. Let it connect you to the world around you. You'll be amazed how much confidence grows from this small act. You'll notice your ears tuning into similar phrases when others speak. You'll notice that speaking English stops feeling like a task and starts feeling like a tool, a part of you, a way to join in. And when the phrase feels right, when it flows, you'll smile. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. That's what I want for you. That's why we created this podcast. To give you real tools for real life. Not lessons to memorize, but phrases to live. You're not alone on this journey. All over the world, people like you are listening right now. Some are walking to work. Some are washing dishes. Some are sitting quietly with a notebook. We're all part of this shared effort to speak, to connect, to grow. And every time you try a phrase, every time you speak English in a way that fits your world, You are making progress. You are moving forward. So, thank you for being here with me today. Thank you for listening, for imagining, for repeating those little phrases with me. Every episode, every practice, every step brings you closer to the English that feels like yours. You're not studying English anymore. You're living it, one phrase at a time. And that's where the magic begins. Remember, fluency isn't about perfection. It's about connection. It's about showing up, phrase by phrase, moment by moment. Every small step you take builds your confidence and brings English closer to your life. So keep practicing, keep speaking, and most importantly, keep believing in yourself. Because the English you want is not a distant goal. It's already inside you, waiting to come alive. This is English Without Limit, and I'm Julia, inviting you to speak freely, live fully, and unlock your true English potential. See you next time.